The wind was cold that morning. Not the kind of cold that makes you pull your jacket tighter and smile because winter is beautiful. The kind of cold that reminds a man exactly where he stands in this world. The kind that seeps through worn-out gloves and settles in your bones like a debt you can't pay off. James Anderson arrived at the site at 5:47 a.m. He always arrived early. Not because the foreman asked him to, not because there was overtime, but because the site was quiet at that hour. No shouting, no laughing behind his back. Just the sound of metal and concrete and the distant hum of a city that was already moving without him. He set down his bag, picked up his shovel, and started working. This was his life. This was all of it. That morning started like every other morning for the past 6 years. But it would not end like every other morning, because at 9:15 a.m., a black Mercedes pulled through the construction gate, the kind of car that doesn't belong on a site like this. Gleamy, NG spotless. Like it had never touched dust in its entire existence. The driver stepped out first-pressed suit, polished shoes, and opened the rear door with the practiced efficiency of a man whose job was to make another man feel important. Richard Calloway stepped out. If you looked at Richard Calloway and tried to find one word for him, the word would be certain. Certain that he was better. Certain that money translated into worth. Certain that the men with dirt on their hands existed to serve the men with clean ones. He was 54 years old. Third-generation wealth. Hotels, retail chains, real estate. A man who had never in his life picked up a shovel but had an opinion about everyone who did. He walked the site with the site manager, Mr. Patterson, pointing at things, frowning at things, frowning at things, speaking in the tone of a man who had never once questioned whether his opinion was welcome. James was carrying steel rebar across the site when it happened. He wasn't looking for attention. I never was. Head down, arms full, boots crunching on gravel, just a man doing his job, moving from point A to point B, the same way he had done 10,000 times before. You there? The voice cut across the site like a blade. James stopped, looked up. Calloway was staring directly at him. Not at his work. Not at what he was carrying. At him. The way a man stares at something he finds mildly offensive. How long have you worked here? James shifted the rebar in his arms. 6 years, sir. Calloway made a sound. Not quite a laugh. Something worse, a dismissal disguised as amusement. 6 years. He repeated the words slowly, like he was tasting something unpleasant. 6 years and you're still carrying steel. He turned to Patterson, shaking his head. What's the point of ambition if men like this don't even try? The site went quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of 5:47 a.m. A different kind of quiet. The kind where 20 men all suddenly find something extremely important to look at that. T isn't the man being humiliated. James said nothing. Calloway looked back at him. Something in the silence bothered him. He had expected a reaction, and the lack of one felt like resistance. What's your name? James Anderson. And you live where, James? One of those cramped apartment blocks off the east side? James didn't answer. I'll take that as a yes. Calloway smiled. Tell me, James Anderson, wife, family, or did that fall apart too along with everything else? And there it was. The words that can't be unsaid. The question designed not to ask but to cut. Every man on that site felt it. Some of them looked away. Some of them stared at the ground. One of the younger workers, a 22-year-old named Sam who had only been on site 3 weeks, looked like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. James stood completely still. Then slowly he reached up and removed his helmet. He held it in his hands, looked down at it for a moment. The yellow paint was chipped. There was a crack along the left side from the time a beam had come loose 18 months ago. He had kept working that day. Hadn't even reported it. He looked up at Calloway. I have a son, James said quietly. His name is Lucas. He's 8 years old, and everything I do every single day I show up here I do for him. He put his helmet back on, picked up the rebar, and kept walking. Calloway watched him go, then made another dismissive sound and turned back to Patterson to continue his inspection. But Patterson didn't respond right away. He was watching James walk across the site steady, unhurried, unbothered in the way that only a man with a very specific kind of strength can be, and something moved across Patterson's face that he didn't quite have a word for. That evening, James sat at the kitchen table of their apartment on the east side of the city. Calloway had been right about that part. It was small. The kind of small that means you learn to be creative with space. Lucas's Drawings were taped to the wall next to the window because there was no room for a proper notice board. The radiator made a knocking sound every night at 11 that James had stopped noticing years ago. The kitchen light flickered sometimes. He kept meaning to fix it. Lucas was at the table doing homework, second grade math. He had his tongue slightly out the way he always did when he was concentrating. James watched him for a moment from the doorway, still in his work clothes, the day's weight sitting across his shoulders like something physical. "Dad," Lucas had looked up. Kids always know. "You okay?" James crossed the room, pulled out the chair beside him, sat down. "Yeah, buddy, just tired." Lucas studied him with the particular intensity that 8-year-olds apply to things that matter. Then he pushed his math worksheet aside, got up, went to the kitchen, and came back 2 minutes later with a mug of instant coffee made exactly the way James liked it, because Lucas had been paying attention since he was 5. He set it on the table in front of his father, sat back down, picked up his pencil. "Mom would have said something mean today happened to you," Lucas said, not looking up. "She always said you get that face." James wrapped his hands around the mug. "She was pretty smart." "I know." They sat together in the small kitchen with the flickering light and the knocking radiator, and James drank his coffee, and Lucas finished his math, and neither of them said anything else for a while, but something had shifted in James that day. Not broke, shifted, like a gear finally engaging. He enrolled in the online civil engineering program 11 days later. He had looked at it before, more than once. Had the tab open on his phone at odd moments on lunch breaks, on the bus, in the bathroom at 2 a.m. when sleep wouldn't come. He knew the curriculum by memory from reading it so many times without clicking the button. He clicked the button. The fee was more than he was comfortable with. He moved some things around, cut what could be cut, signed up for the payment plan. He told no one at work. His study hours were 9 p.m. to midnight after Lucas was in bed, sometimes longer if Lucas had fallen asleep quickly and the apartment was quiet. He sat at the same kitchen table with his laptop and his textbooks, most of them used, bought off an online marketplace, some with previous students' notes still in the margins, and he learned structural engineering, project management, materials science, load distribution, cost analysis, construction law. He was not a fast learner. He had never claimed to be. His mind worked the way his hands worked, methodically, carefully, without shortcuts. He read things twice, sometimes 3 times. He drew diagrams. He made notes in a small green notebook that he kept in the front pocket of his work bag and reviewed on his lunch breaks while everyone else ate and laughed and talked. Some nights he fell asleep at the table. Lucas would find him in the morning, head on his arms, the laptop still open. On those mornings, Lucas would quietly close the laptop, get himself ready for school, make toast for both of them, and wake his father with a gentle shake and the words, "Dad, you'll be late," with no accusation in his voice, only a kind of careful love that no 8-year-old should have to have learned, but some do. James would wake up, look at his son, and feel something in his chest that he didn't have a name for that was equal parts gratitude and guilt and something fierce that kept him going. The first rejection letter came from Harmon and Associates, the second from Tri-State Infrastructure. By the 5th, James had developed a system. He would read the letter, set it face down on the table, make coffee, drink it standing at the kitchen window looking at the street below, then fold the letter neatly and place it in a shoebox he kept on the top shelf of the closet. He had not yet decided whether keeping them was strength or stubbornness. By the 10th rejection, the shoebox was getting full. Some of the firms were polite. "We regret to inform you that at this time," some were not. One wrote back 3 lines. Another didn't write back at all, just silence, which somehow said more than words could. One rejection stung differently. He had made it to the second interview at Meridian Construction Group. 2 rounds. The second interviewer had been impressed, had said so directly, had made a comment about James's practical experience being genuinely rare among candidates. James had driven home from that interview with something he had been careful not to feel too much of. The rejection came 4 days later. He read it, set it down, made his coffee, stood at the window. Lucas found him there 20 minutes later, which meant he had been standing longer than he'd realized. "What happened?" "Just thinking." Lucas was quiet for a moment. "And is it the job thing?" James turned to look at him. "Oh, do you know about the job thing?" "Dad." Lucas gave him the look, the one that said, "You are not as subtle as you think you are." James almost laughed, almost. Yeah, the job thing. Lucas nodded slowly in the manner of someone processing important information. You'll get one, he said. You know everything about construction. I've seen your notebook. There's so many drawings in there. James looked at his son. Yeah? Yeah. Lucas was already moving toward the kitchen. Do you want eggs? The eviction notice came on a Thursday. Not unexpected, the landlord had given 2 warnings already, but the timing had a particular cruelty to it that James had not anticipated. He had been 2 weeks from completing Module 7 of his program. He had a promising application out to a firm he had researched carefully. He had been, for the first time in several months, feeling something that cautiously resembled momentum. He stood in the hallway of their apartment holding the envelope. 30 days. He looked around the small space. Lucas's drawings on the wall, the knocking radiator, the flickering light he had never gotten around to fixing. 6 years of a life built carefully in the margins of another kind of life. He put the notice in his pocket. That evening he looked at what he had. He had been saving not enough, but something. He called his sister in Delaware, who was dealing with her own situation and could only offer a couch for 2 weeks maximum, no more. He looked at temporary housing options, at costs, at numbers that did not add up no matter how he arranged them. Then the truck. 3 days after the eviction notice, the truck, a 2009 Ford F-150 with 217,000 miles and a transmission that had been showing signs of trouble for 6 months, finally gave out on the highway, 40 minutes from the city, at 7 a.m. James sat in the truck on the shoulder of the road as cars went past. He called the foreman to say he'd be late. He called a tow. He sat in the cab and looked at his phone and did the math that he already knew the answer to. The repair estimate was $2,400. He had $810 in the account he hadn't touched for emergencies. He sat in the broken truck on the highway shoulder for a long time. At some point he noticed that the sky was a very clean blue, the kind of blue that appears in early autumn when the air finally gets serious. He looked at it through the windshield, this enormous, indifferent, completely beautiful sky, and he thought about Richard Calloway and his black Mercedes, and about Lucas making coffee at 9 p.m. because his father was studying, and about the shoebox full of rejection letters on the top shelf of the closet they were about to be evicted from. And James Anderson did something he had not done since the night his wife died. He put his forehead against the steering wheel, and he let himself feel how hard it was. Not for long, a few minutes. The way you might allow yourself to stand in the rain before you decide to start moving. Then, he lifted his head, called a different tow company with a lower rate, and started working the problem. The bicycle was red. Lucas had gotten it for his 7th birthday the previous year. It was the one thing he had asked for specifically, carefully. Over many months, the red bicycle with the silver handlebars that he had seen in the window of the shop on Morrison Street and pointed to every single time they passed it, with a restraint that broke James's heart because even at 7, Lucas had understood that pointing was different from asking. James had saved for 4 months for that bicycle. The morning James came home to find it gone, he stood in the hallway for a long moment before he realized. Lucas was sitting at the kitchen table, hands folded, looking at the door with the particular expression of someone who has made a decision they are not going to apologize for. "Lucas, I got $115, Lucas said. Mr. Kim at the shop down the street gave me $100. D and 15. He said it was a good bike. James couldn't speak. And Mrs. Pereira from 4B gave me $30 because I helped her carry groceries for 3 weeks. I didn't tell you because I wanted it to be enough." Lucas reached under the table and pulled out a plastic bag, set it on the table between them. Steel-toe boots are important for the job applications. The good kind. They show you're serious. Inside the bag was a pair of steel-toe work boots, not the cheapest pair, not the most expensive, the right pair, the kind a project director would wear. Lucas had done his research. James sat down at the table. He looked at the boots in the bag, then at his son, this 8-year-old boy with his mother's eyes and his mother's way of loving people so directly that it bypassed every defense you had, and he felt something happen inside his chest that he was not going to describe, not to himself, not to anyone, because some things are not for words. "Lucas," Nally said. "Don't." Lucas shook his head. "I know you're going to say I shouldn't have, but Dad." He looked at his father with complete seriousness. "You're going to be a project director, I already know, and you needed the boots." A long silence. "I'm going to get you another bicycle," James said. I know, Lucas nodded. A better one. The 18th application went to a firm called Northgate Development Group. James had almost not sent it. Not because he lacked confidence something in him had changed after the bicycle, after the boots, after sitting in the broken truck on the highway shoulder and choosing to keep moving. He had nearly not sent it because Northgate was bigger than anywhere he had applied before. A serious firm. The kind that typically hired people with credentials from universities he had never attended. He sent it anyway. He wore the steel-toe boots to the interview. The interview was with a woman named Dr. Helen Marsh, head of infrastructure development. Tea lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes, which James later learned was considerably longer than any interview she had conducted in the previous 3 years. She had asked him about load-bearing calculations, about project phasing, about managing subcontractors, about what you do when weather and supply chains and labor disputes all intersect on the same week of a critical deadline. She had asked him about failure specifically. She had asked him to describe a time when a project had gone wrong and what he had done. He had talked for 11 minutes without stopping. At the end, Dr. Marsh had leaned back in her chair and looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. "Mr. Anderson," she said, "I've been doing this for 22 years. I've interviewed hundreds of engineers. Most they can tell me what the textbook says. Very few of them can tell me what the ground says." She paused. "You can tell me what the ground says." James got the job, project director, Tier 1 infrastructure. Development. He was assigned to the Northgate Meridian project, a $340 million infrastructure development that included a highway interchange, 2 commercial transit hubs, and a pedestrian bridge that would become, in the following years, one of the more photographed structures in the city. The offer letter came on a Tuesday morning. He read it 3 times, then he folded it, put it in his pocket, drove to Lucas's school, walked to his classroom and knocked on the door. The teacher opened it, looked at him questioningly. James asked if he could borrow Lucas for 1 minute. Lucas came to the door, looked at his father's face. "Did you get it?" James held up the folded letter. Lucas didn't whoop or jump. He was his father's son. He stood very still for a moment, and then he nodded once slowly, with a dignity that didn't belong on an 8-year-old's face but fit perfectly on this particular 8-year-old. Then he hugged his father in the doorway of the 2nd grade classroom, very tightly, for a long time. The Northgate Meridian project broke ground on a Tuesday in late spring. James was there at 5:47 a.m. Old habits. He stood at the edge of the site in the early quiet, looking at the scope of what was going to be built, and he thought about steel rebar and a cracked yellow helmet and a man in a black Mercedes and a shoebox full of rejection letters and a red bicycle that was gone. He put on his hard hat. It was white, clean. The letters on the front read, "Project Director." He had not asked for that. Dr. Marsh had arranged it on the first day without being asked. The same way she had arranged for his office to have a window that faced the site, because she understood what kind of man she had hired. The project moved quickly under his direction. Not recklessly. James did not do anything recklessly, but efficiently, systematically, with the particular confidence of someone who has learned everything twice, once in a textbook and once with their hands. He hired people. He listened to the workers. He walked the site every morning at 6 a.m., not because he was checking on anyone, but because he had always believed that you cannot run a project from a desk. The workers noticed this. Word moved through crews the way it always does, and the word about James Anderson was, he knows the work. He has done the work. You will not fool him, and he will not disrespect you. 3 months in, a crew veteran named Roy, 31 years in construction, the kind of man who had seen project directors come and go and had formed opinions about all of them, stopped James one morning. "Mr. Anderson." "Roy." Roy looked at him for a moment in the direct way of men who have spent decades in physical work and don't waste time getting to the point. "You used to carry steel," Roy said. "A lot of guys on this site knew you before." James said nothing. "I just wanted to say." Roy stopped, considered his words. "It means something, that you got here, the way why, or got here." He paused, that's all. James looked at him. "Thank you, Roy." Roy nodded, went back to work. 7 months into the project, a request came through to meet with a new client group seeking to discuss a potential expansion contract. James's assistant, Maya, brought him the folder. He was on the phone with the site engineer when she set it on his desk. He finished the call, opened the folder, and began reviewing the client details: corporation name, project scope, preliminary figures. Then he saw the name. Callaway Group LLC, Richard Callaway. James sat with the folder open for a moment. Then he set it down, looked out the window at the site, at the steel and the cranes and the men working below in their hard hats. He thought about a cold morning in a yellow helmet with a crack in it, about a question asked in front of 20 people that was designed to reduce a man to nothing. Then he thought about Lucas at the kitchen table with a plastic bag and $145 in absolute unshakable faith. James closed the folder. "Maya," he called. She appeared in the doorway. "Confirm the meeting. Standard briefing room. Tuesday, 2 o'clock. Richard Callaway arrived 12 minutes early. He had brought 2 associates, younger men in expensive suits with the polished, slightly anxious energy of people who work for someone who requires them to be polished and slightly anxious. The North 8 offices were not flashy. They were serious, the kind of serious that comes from a firm that has been building significant things for a long time and has no need to impress anyone. The briefing room had a long table, chairs, a window overlooking the active site, and framed photographs of completed projects on the walls. Callaway looked around the room with the practiced assessment of a man who automatically evaluated the worth of every space he entered. He noted the quality of the furniture, the view. He mentioned to one of his associates that the firm's met appropriately established. He looked at his watch. At 2 o'clock exactly, the door opened. Callaway looked up. James Anderson walked in. He was wearing a fitted charcoal jacket and dark trousers, professional, precise, the kind of clothes that belonged in this room. His hair was neat. His posture was the same posture it had always been, the posture of a man who carries weight and has learned to carry it without showing the cost. And on his head, he was wearing his project director's hard hat. White, clean. Project director across the front. Beside him, matching him step for step, was Lucas. 8 years old, school shoes, a small blazer that Maya had helped him find. And on his head, a miniature hard hat, white, matching with 2 words written on the front in the same clean block letters, future director. James had not planned a speech. He did not have revenge in his heart. That was not what this was, and it was important to him that it not be what this was. He was not here to humiliate a man the way he had been humiliated. That was not the lesson he was teaching Lucas. He simply walked in, and he let the room do what rooms do when the person who enters them has earned the right to be there. Callaway stared. Not with recognition at first. It took a moment, the way it always takes a moment to place someone you only ever looked at as a background detail. Then something shifted in his face, a movement behind the eyes, the specific look of a man accessing a memory he had not valued when he made it. James crossed to the head of the table, set down his folder, looked at Callaway. "Mr. Callaway," he said, "I'm James Anderson, project director for the Northgate Meridian project. Thank you for coming in." A brief pause. "I think we may have met before." The room was very quiet. Callaway's jaw moved. Nothing came out. James looked down at Lucas. Lucas looked up at his father, then turned to look at Callaway with the calm, clear eyes of a child who has seen his father. Their study through the night and walk across a construction site with rebar in his arms and stand in a broken truck on a highway shoulder and keep going. Lucas did not smile, did not gloat, did not perform anything. He simply held his father's hand, and that was everything. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. James ran it professionally, thoroughly, without a trace of anything personal in his voice or his manner. He presented the expansion proposal with the same methodical precision he brought to everything. His knowledge was complete. His experience was evident. His authority in that room was not constructed, it was simply true. The way things that are earned tend to be simply true. Callaway's associates did most of the talking as the meeting progressed. Callaway himself was quieter than he normally was in rooms like this, which his associates noticed but did not comment on. At the end, as everyone was gathering their materials, Callaway stood and for a moment seemed to prepare tea. "Oh, say something." He looked at James, started a sentence that didn't come. James looked back at him. Steady, patient, not unkind. "My assistant will send the follow-up documents by end of week," James said. "We'll look forward to hearing from you." Callaway nodded. He left. James stood at the window for a moment after everyone had gone, watching the site below. The cranes, the workers in their hard hats, the steel going up. Lucas appeared beside him, still in his little hard hat. He pressed his nose against the glass. "Dad, yeah?" That man looked like he felt bad. James thought about this. I think maybe he did. Lucas was quiet for a moment. Then, Good, he said, not with cruelty. Simply with the honesty of a child who has watched his father be treated as less than he was. James put his hand on his son's shoulder. They stood at the window together, looking at what had been built, looking at what was still being built, looking at the men below with their helmets and their tools and their lives carried in the specific, uncelebrated, essential way that the people who actually build the world always carry them. Hey, Lucas, yeah? I think it's time for a new bicycle. Lucas turned to look at him. The smile that came across his son's face was the kind of smile that makes a man understand completely and without question that every single thing he went through to get here was worth it. Every morning, every night, every rejection letter in every shoebox, every cold hour on every site, every second of doubt and exhaustion and the particular loneliness of a man trying to build something real with nothing but his hands and his will and love for a child who deserved better. All of it, worth it. James Anderson drove home that evening with his son in the passenger seat. The new truck, not new, but newer, moved through the city as the light changed from afternoon to evening, the sky going amber and then deep blue the way it does in autumn when the air gets Furious, Lucas had his hard hat on his lap, turning it in his hands. Dad, he said. Yeah, bud. When I'm a director, Lucas said, I want an office window that faces the site too. James looked at him. How do you know about the window? Lucas gave him the look. James laughed. For the first time in what felt like a very long time, unguarded, completely, all the way James Anderson laughed. And Lucas laughed too, and the truck moved through the city and the sky went deep blue. And somewhere in this story that is about more things than it seems to be about fathers and sons, about dignity and labor, about what a man can build when he refuses to let someone else decide what he is worth, somewhere in all of it. The point is simply this. Some men remove their helmets in silence because they have nothing left to say, and some men remove their helmets in silence because what they are going to do next cannot be described with words. It can only be shown. If this story moved you, if you know someone who carries more than they show, leave a comment below. Tell us about the person who inspired you. We read every single one.